So here's the design of phase 1, the high level concept of the land design. We're calling this the spear of permaculture. We start off with the rains and dissolved nutrients coming off the high ground with the wind and the sun. Water retention from floods under the entire land like a covered dam. Our problem is the covered dam then recedes and the land becomes dry. It then burns, the wood is cut and the nutrients are continuously removed. What we need to do is keep water in the dry season by using wells, ponds and specialized swales. Use drip irrigation out of the ponds to keep the grass green and cut it. Also restrict fire. With the special swales we'll be increasing our edge, increasing the plant and trees that can grow there because we've raised them out of the oxygen depriving waters. And we'll be creating shades, which also allows the microclimates to grow further. The cut grass will be turning into compost, which will effectively again feed back into the plants, which will create more shade. And this whole cycle, just by adding the water, bringing the water up in the dry season, creating those ponds, creating those special swales, increasing our edge, we'll be able to exponentially drive this across the land and get rid of all that sandy, deprived areas where nutrient is constantly being washed off the land or cut out in the trees. Our basic waste input and waste streams are shown here. Everything comes back to the middle to be cycled physically by a person or is naturally cycled inside the soils and by the continuous function of each of the elements in here. So as we can see, we have water and sun with the plants, provide the initial food for the animals which feed on each other and can pass back their waste into the soil, which is again cycled back through compost, back into the plants, which then comes back out with water and soil and feeds back into the animals. The insects are also feeding on the plants, the various fruits, and the waste again from the humans actually into the keyhole gardens and then coming back out to feed the crickets and the black fly, which then ultimately feeds the animals, the fish and the chickens, and possibly even the ducks, and then again goes back into the soil. All this creates better healthy soils, better healthy animals because you get better shade and shelter, and ultimately is a fuel for the entire process going around and around. So by increasing our edges, by making sure these systems are feeding back into themselves and not being taken off the land, and the nutrients constantly being fed cyclically around, either physically by humans or by the animals themselves, in the case of the chickens and even the ducks, we can increase the nutritional retention in the soil and thereby making it a far more fertile soil and land to then create what it is that we need. So this is our base. These are the elements that we need to start achieving an improvement in the soil and increasing those edges. Here are the elements and some other interactions. We also bring the old doggy in there to show his necessity. This will be to show that dogs are necessary because they protect things like ducks and chickens that actually do quite a bit of work, especially around compost piles and spreading of compost on soils that we don't have to do. The chickens also obviously then produce eggs, which we then consume. Fish is constantly producing food, which is then consumed by both the humans, the dogs and the chickens. Even the black fly, those things that we don't eat can be consumed by the black flies and become feed also for chicken, ducks and fish themselves. So as we can see again, nutrients are being fed back into the system. The goats will produce nitrogen. Most of the animals again will add to the nitrogen. Although the humans and the dogs, we probably won't put the nitrogen directly into the soil like those farm animals. We will produce manure that will then go on to the larger plants that will create shade. And the shade and the shelter will allow things like bamboo to, or rather bamboo will become the shade, which then can create shelter for humans, which then ultimately, and for the animals, which then makes them healthier. And so then they produce better and better manures coming back into the soil to create nitrogens. Also we'll put some groundnuts, cassava, yam, all these nitrogen fixing plants will then also add to the soil's nutritional. Sweet potatoes, pigeon pea will then actually allow us to create good pawpaws, which then go back into the insects and for the fish and for the chickens. Also the crickets and the black flies to then produce, to come back into the system. Here we have algae and duckweed that we can also grow in the ponds to then feed to the ducks, or then provide as feed to both ducks, chickens and crickets and black flies, as well as the fish. So everything here again becomes food or is food and provides food. So again, those are the elements, and these are the aspects or the elements that we're going to be concentrating on in the design. We're going to increase them, we're going to stabilize them, we're going to ensure that the nutrients are continuously fed back into the system, and because of the water, the sun and the wind and the minerals coming into from the water, this will exponentially, effectively explode over zone 1, especially if we can keep the retain the water, we can retain the nutrients through a season or a year, and we can stop the fire. And this will dramatically increase what we can then produce on this land. So here are the details of the design. Just to give a bit of orientation first, here was the zone 1, and here is where we showed you earlier that where all the items are. And here's the zone 1 with respect to zone 2 and the beach, and then zone 3 around outside of that. Into here, we can actually go in and zoom into the land. So here we have our security hut. We've planted yam piles, and then we've created a fence along the edge that actually goes and overlaps over the security hut. And we can actually take a look to see that. So there's the security hut, and we can have people sit here and do their handwork, and some of the dogs can hang out in here, out of the shade. You'll have a cool breeze coming up through from the beach in the afternoon. As this heats up and pushes air up, the breeze will suck in from the beach. So the yam piles will eventually grow probably over one rain season. And what we can do is we can take some of the palm leaves over here and put them in place until the yams grow. We won't even have to remove it. We'll use bush sticks to make the fence. Here we'll have our drying hut, and this will be to preserve our food throughout whatever we produce, as well as possibly integrating with some of the local fishermen who are fishing on a regular basis on that beach. We can go out, we can either buy some of the fish or dry it for them. By gutting it and heading it, we can also produce some more nutrients as inputs. Here we'll have the insect hut not too far, and you can see the paths already in place there. These are naturally worn paths, the way people walk on the land. Obviously these were there when the initial attempt was to make the aquaponics, which failed because they came and stole the solar pumps, and then the beds that were already there, which will be converting into covered gardens. The beds dried up in the dry season, and the water was over 600 meters away, and so they were abandoned. Here, what we'll do is we'll put a chicken house in here for chickens that are retained in the house, and they'll produce the eggs. They also require food input, which we can also give a little bit to the ducks and the chickens, who are sitting here in what we're calling a chicken omolanki hut, which is a movable hut. And these chickens will be not necessarily the egg layers that we use here, but a different type of chicken that usually roams around. And of course there's a local chicken that we can use here, and it can basically take the compost and spread it around this area. And what we will do is we'll actually drip irrigate a lot of this area to keep it nice and fertile even in the dry season. We'll also drip irrigate a lot of this area on the outside to make sure it doesn't get too dry and creates a fire barrier. So we've got a lot of compost. We'll be cutting a lot of grass and making compost out of it, and we describe how to make these compost piles and how to make these long compost piles that actually collect the water that you put on top of the compost to put back on compost or to use in your plants in other areas. So here we have the goat hut, and we also have a movable goat hut which can travel along the edge here and effectively fertilize the soils or the sands along those edges, which will then also add leaf and will fertilize the whole edge and increase the edge and allow this edge to go out as we start to irrigate it a little bit more and retain further water through the dry season. Here we'll plant a few of the shade trees and see which one does the best and allow it to grow and basically shade over this middle central area. These little blue points are what we're doing with wells, and we've got a video here that will show how to dig a well with nothing more than 4-inch pipe and a 2-inch pipe and a simple head made out of a bouncy ball and 2-inch pipe, and this will effectively allow you to drill down to 4 to 6 to 8 meters. We feel the water's only about 4 meters below the surface, and it will be easily brought up to the surface. So we've got about 6 wells around that will produce water for various areas, slightly bigger well for the covered gardens. The covered gardens will merely be some of the beds that were already there, with bush sticks lined down the edges and then across the top. During the wet season there'll be nothing on no cover. During the dry season we'll again use palm leaves to cover and tie them down. And we'll do partial cover, so each of the plants get shades and there'll be a cool area. We'll also use a 100 foot by 6 foot plastic PLA sheeting and create a water course all the way down the middle. It'll be about 1.5 feet deep, and we can put fish in it, both of them. So again, that also adds to the cooling of the area, which is one of the major issues. And through the wet season we'll also try and enhance some of the land around here and do drip irrigation to get some of that green grass that we'll show you in the pictures and keep it rather than having it burned. These are keyhole gardens that we'll use. As you can see, each of the keyholes open up to the specific pathways that occurred around here already, and they're right around the security hut, so easy access. We can put everything from our food waste to any other scraps that we find around and constantly put it in there. We can even put from the goat shelters and the chicken manure that comes out. We'll be cutting grass and putting grass in the chicken huts and then taking it out and putting it in there to, of course, produce compost in these. Along here we'll be using, again, the plastic sheeting in a long covered swale, and then we can do banana circles, and we'll explain those, how those work. And along here also we can plant a series of different plants from either a covered waterway or a shallow water with a few fish, and that will effectively, by using a swale method, it'll suck the water up into the sandy hill that we plant our various plants on. We will need the plastic sheeting in both of these to keep the water up, especially during the dry season. During the wet season, it'll be filled naturally. As the water comes in from the rain, it'll capture it. But then during the dry season, we can actually fill it with well water that we've got down here, and we can just bring it over and make sure it gets filled. Might be worthwhile even drilling a little well in here so it's easily accessible. Again, these wells will take no more than a few hours to drill, and you'll have water constantly. It's all cost effective, and we've analysed the cost for everything. These are what we're calling specialised swales. Again, we're using the plastic sheeting to develop that pond that we then cover, and then we put the hill of sand above it. And again, we'll start with things like groundnuts and cassava, and we'll plant things like yams and make yam fences for the initial shading, and then we'll put the bamboo in the background and make sure that it's got drip irrigation for a year or so, and that should effectively give us these nice big yam or bamboo shade that will enhance our ability to cool the areas. And these shades and these things do not cost that much. The cost analysis is done at the end, but once these are done for the initial setup, we can then push these out right across the zone 2 until we get to the river. This will allow us to enhance the growing season for farming, for the artisan farming, and then we can come back and make beds all along within the shaded area and slowly grow this whole area out. Here we've put a nursery that's effectively a germination hut with nurseries that again will be covered gardens. This area specifically is cleared already, but is surrounded by bush. It's a square area that was cleared for some other reasons a long time ago, probably 25 years ago before the war. And this effectively will be our nursery. It's next to the duck pond, which is here. It's a raised duck pond, so it's very easy to have a pipe in the duck pond and just use siphoning to get the water out over the plants, into these ponds, into the compost, into the covered gardens, and bring it to the nursery. This is effectively the owner's house, who will be coming, who won't be constantly there, so it's not a central piece of the design, but it is part of the design, because eventually it will turn into a storage area, and you can do things like dry leaves, and there's a big foundation in the front which can also become a training center for permaculture if we wanted to expand as a very initial phase. This is where there'll be again a secondary aquaponics test system. The first one failed, as we said earlier. But one of the reasons it failed was because of the lack of security, the lack of permanence on the land, and because people needed to leave all the time to get inputs, food, etc. With this phase 1, our main goal is to stabilize the nutrients, but also to create a constant security on the land to allow us to expand. The aquaponics in phase 2 will become part of the design, but initially it will be looked at as a separate piece being done effectively by the owner, who will come in, design a small one, automate it, and then hand it over to security. Don't expect more than a few hours a day. They won't be growing too much there, so it won't be a major input, but it will be something that they need to spend probably about 20 to 30 minutes a day keeping an eye on and learning from, which will be the major aspect of what we're trying to achieve there. So now we can go back to the document, I think. So what we can do here now actually is to zoom in and take a bit of a look. As we can see, everything's been designed. You can understand the size of things. Here's your black flying cricket hutches off the ground, obviously, and the chicken rather open. They can actually walk quite happily in this bush area. It's nice and shaded. There is enough sunlight that comes through the trees, and we can control that. The local almond tree was the original expectation, but there are many other trees that may also do well. And we may do a few trees here just to create a nice big shaded area. There is a document where we have quite a few spectacular trees of the area that we will be looking to enhance the land with. As time goes on, we'll try and collect them in the local area and bring them in. So that will be something that is an added opportunity in phase 1 if time permits. As you can see, large compost piles going up here, constantly be adding to on a daily basis if we can. Spending about an hour to do compost piles will be highly very good for the adding to the nutrition of the site. You've got different types of ponds that we're showing here. This would be a fish pond, and you'd use again the plastic to go down about a foot or 2 and come back up. It's a 6 foot by 100 foot piece of plastic. It's PLA. It'll degrade over time, but it will do the job of creating a water source, and you can actually pile the swale into the water and then have it come up. The sand will show you in pictures. Once you put it in place, it really doesn't sink into the water. It holds its shape, and it seems to be very good. It almost holds its shape better when it has water. So it has quite a bit of density, and it should probably be analysed. Here again we've got different, these are more covered swales with a little pond in the middle. So what we do is effectively put the plastic in, put the swale sand in, and then dig the hole back out of the sand, and because it's full of water, the water will naturally come up here. This is effectively what happens across the land where you see ponds. This is what's happening. The water is seeping out of the sand. And again, as we said, the sand tends to hold its shape very well despite the water. If you had regular beach sand, this would basically all collapse, suck in, and then it would all level out again. This sand doesn't do that. And we can also put a lot of grass stuff in here, some of the grass roots, to ensure that it keeps a bit more solid on the edge, and then it decomposes and again becomes part of the nutrients for the water. Again, wells. These are what we think will be the final look, where we'll have bamboo here. Bamboo obviously very nutritious, it's good for fodder, it's great for structures, it burns better than any other wood, and it grows very fast. It's one of the fastest growing plants we have, and we do have it in the area. It is local to the country, so not a big problem there. Here we can take a look at our designed 3-toilet and designed compost toilet. This is so that as we bring labour onto the site, we don't get defecation on the site. We actually start to retain the nutrient, we use it, it becomes worthwhile to the farm. Here is what we're calling our chicken omalanke. They have a kind of a wheelbarrow that uses the back end of a truck and the tires, and effectively it has a flat bed. That flat bed can scoot under this design and carry it and move it wherever you want, rather like the chicken tractors, only our particular wheels can be used and carry on being used in the farm. Once we've deposited the chickens in the right area, These chickens tend to be very good at coming back. Once they get used to an area, you can let them out and roam, as long as they don't roam into these areas. If they've got enough to do over here with the compost, obviously we'd bring them this close to the rest of the farm only when the composting's ready, and it'll keep their attention. These little circles will be areas where we'll start to plant, and we'll show you pictures of these types of things. You can plant cassava, you can plant different pawpaw, you can plant bananas, and what we'll do is we'll raise the ground a little bit just by throwing sand in a pile, and then we'll put some black dirt at the bottom. We'll plant what we're going to do, we'll put some black dirt on the top, and then we'll put some cut grass as mulch on the top. We'll keep it watered. As you can see, the wells are right here. Put a bit of duck fish pond water on it too. We can take a look at our design of the duck pond. Again, initially we'll need a shelter. We can use again palm leaves. We'll create a shelter for the ducks. This could be out of concrete just to keep something solid. The ducks can come in here in the evenings. We can put, if we want to fence them in. The pond will be high level, and there's a pipe coming out that can go either into this pond, or it can be used to just a pipe. Because it's high level, we can do siphoning and use it to actually put water all the way around here. We can connect it to an irrigation pipe, although there is concern that it might clog the irrigation pipe, so it may be what we need to do is put some kind of a filter here so it doesn't. So we could put it into a bucket which has some sand in it, and the sand will retain most of the solids, but then the water will go to the bottom, and that can then go through, be filtered by a small piece of cloth, and that can then go through to the irrigation pipes, as you can see. So that's a good look at the sand. Here's the beach pretty close, and we can zoom in again also. To the nursery. Here's your germination, and there's woods all the way around here, so this will only get sun top and bottom, and it won't get too much of the evening sun because the bush again rises up to about here, so it should get quite a bit of sun, but not too much to make it to cause problems to something like a pawpaw tree that in its younger stage does actually like quite a bit of shade. And here we can also create shade, just like the covered gardens, for the germination areas and for the nursery. We'll take a look at the owner's house. Again, rather tall. It'll be about 12 foot tall here. Comes down to about 10 foot, and then these are 8. And these again can be covered to create further shade. Very open, one big room, so it can be converted to pretty much anything. Storage, almost like a barn. It's about 30 foot long by 15 foot long. Again, a classroom, a barn, multi-purpose building effectively that can be converted through the progression of different phases of the design and of the farm as needed. So that should provide a pretty good understanding of what our intentions are. Now what we can do is go to each different component and describe and explain them. So here we have it. What we're trying to achieve here is a sustainable security with minimal inputs that can feed itself as well as continue the artisanal farming for a few hours a day up by the river or the upper stream. We will enhance the tools used by those artisan farmers by providing a pump, by teaching composting, and by providing scythes to cut the grass and ensure that it doesn't burn, which will then provide help with the composting and even mulch some of those beds that we will show later on in the presentation, where they are effectively bare sand with a little bit of black dirt in them, and then they're flooded because the water rises. Not a bad thing in the wet season if you have the right plants growing in it, But if you can then retain that water, retain that those nutrients, it's extremely, it will create exponential growth along the area. And then the fires will no longer become an issue. So as you can see, we've got yam beds raised across here, and those yams will eventually grow and provide us effectively a food fence. The keyhole gardens, well explained here. There's some links to them for further explanation. Obviously you put your food in here and you grow the products. Most of the keyhole gardens will probably be used to grow the local food. We'll be concentrating on what the security and the farmers eat, rather than the owner. He can eat whatever they eat, quite frankly, because they will be there 24 hours. And the whole point is to keep at least 2 people in the area, even though we have 5 people, and it won't be the same 2 people. So visiting family and coming back, but constantly having people around and making sure that things are flowing, the cycles are being constantly cycled through, the various elements are going into the right place, and ensuring that continual planting is going on. One of the things that do occur is that people tend to plant once, do a lot of watering, and then harvest. During rain season they don't have to do as much watering, so then they just come back and fertilize and harvest. They use a chemical fertilizer, not compost. We're going to try and teach them how to produce hot compost, long-term compost, how to retain their compost in the soil. We'll even put the plastic in the bottom of some of those compost piles that we showed, so that again we can retain those nutrients and put it back onto the compost. This is a tropic, so there'll be a very fast conversion of elements in the soils and in the compost, so we'll constantly have to feed that compost, and that will be part of the 5 hours per person per day that will be going into the stabilizing of this area. Here is the compost toilet. As you can see, we've raised the actual starting point kind of high. It drops down onto a mesh. The mesh separates most of the solids that come out here and will roll down and dry off, and the liquids will come out here. We'll show it to you in a different angle. The liquids, here we can either retain liquids, or we can actually use this to collect liquids, and this is where we can use it to then add nutrients once it's been cooked quite well by the sun. And it'll come off, some of the nutrients will come off from the actual toilet. These are openings that will have mesh over them, so that air comes in here. It will be, the air in there will be heated up. This will be effectively just like a regular framed window in here to collect the sun. As you saw, it is facing the sun constantly. It has no shade on it, and we'll get morning to evening sun. This is actually the highest point. Where this pipe comes out is the highest point in the whole area, and that pipe will heat up, and that heat will be, the air will be drawn in here and constantly carried up through that pipe. It should get to the stage where there isn't even any smells coming out of the actual main seats, because that air will be constantly sucked up through the top. This will dry the feces very well and allow for a very good conversion of human manure. There are a couple of things we should point out. Human manure can be very dangerous, so understanding it, reading about it, and getting the concept right is essential. It shouldn't be used, especially in the first phase, for any of the human consumed and probably even the animal consumed stuff. But it will be very beneficial to things like bamboo in the outer areas, and trees that are being grown purely for shade, and around the bush area where you're not going to put the goats necessarily, and to enhance the soils there, because the plants already have the water, but the nutrient isn't very strong yet in those areas. So wells, here is a video that explains exactly how to build a well using a 4-inch plastic pipe. It's very simple, very easy, and all the required materials are present in the local market, and this can be achieved very quickly. Within a space of 3 to 4 hours, you can probably have a 4-meter well dug very easily, and have a pumping mechanism that allows it to come out simply by taking a 2-inch pipe and moving it up and down. It will pump water. It's quite amazing, and the fact that this video shows exactly the same type of soils that we have here on the land. And once those soils are established, even if you start putting plants there, it shouldn't be a problem for those to continue. Obviously in the wet season we won't need them at all probably, because we can just dig a hole about a foot deep and we'll get a puddle of water. The next piece is the covered gardens. Here we've explained we use bush sticks to create the structure, and then we'll have water coming down the middle. The compost isn't too far away, it can be spread out. Once we've harvested something on it, we can then have the chickens put a big pile of compost on there and have the chickens basically spread it all out for us, because they love to bring down a pile of anything. The animal husbandry will be a major component in understanding whether or not the entire process is being successful, especially if we get to the stage where we're no longer bringing food in for the animals, because there's enough food in the actual system to actually continue to feed them and the people themselves as well. So here is the egg-laying chicken hut. It's a special chicken. It's called the English chicken. We bring it in from a chicken, an egg farm, in the local area. So we've already identified the lady and the food that they will produce, and this is exactly where we can produce clean protein right away from the humans. One of the biggest problems we realized was that getting protein onto the land was a major issue. And so this is basically the best form of protein, the cleanest and the most consistent and easily produced. So self-sustainability, major step there. Here's the movable chicken. We call it the chicken omalanki. And effectively this design should allow us to send the local chickens, which are not necessarily chickens you use to have eggs to eat, but actually to create more chickens, and you can eat them later on as protein. And of course they have very good manure that can be spread out over the land and convert things like black fly and crickets into manure, which can then add nutrients to the land and nitrogen. Goat hut. Again, what we'll do with the goat hut, we have a movable goat hut. Again, the same omalanki can move the goat hut. We're taking the goat hut out there, the movable goat hut, so that when the goats go and eat, we can leave them in the area and they will naturally have a place for shade, because it gets very hot in the day and they'll want to find shade, and it gets very rainy in the rain season and they'll want to find shade. And the goats will actually be able to walk back into this hut and go out to this hut once they know where it is. And once they've gone there a few times, as the sun goes down, the local goats will always know they'll start to, if they're not tied up, they will come home. So it's a very good mechanism for this piece of land. Because you're in the middle of the land, it's very secure. And once the goats know that this is the home for the night, they will generally walk back in. And what we'll create will either put plastic or make a cement floor that basically feeds back into a lower trough, so we can capture liquids, we can capture from the rains that then wash the nitrogen or the ammonia out and put it in here. And we can basically pull in the grass that we've laid down and pull it all into this bed, and then this will go onto the compost pile, again collecting nutrients and cycling them and using them in the right areas that we need them. The shaded pools around zone 1, again these are probably the final types of trees that we'd like to after the bamboo. Initially we'd start off with bamboos, and here we're showing it growing and then covering the duck pond. The fish pond, this is the basic swale. What we can do in the rain season is come out here and dig out and create a pile all the way around the edge. Again, expanding the edge, creating a pond and seeing if we can use clay or just tread on these areas to see if we can retain the water. We've already talked about a PLA plastic, and we've also talked about the ability to take starch, a cheap starch, mix it with vinegar and create a water retention. That will also actually become biodegradable and could convert into very good nutrients for the pond. Something to look into and definitely test. Word about experiments, don't get too carried away. We'll talk about experiments a little further on. Here, blackfly and cricket, and again descriptions of blackfly and cricket farming can be provided. We suggest books and videos. There's quite a bit out there. They're not very expensive, and we will actually provide them if the understanding isn't there. But we will concentrate on the initial part of the design to show this aspect, because it is a very good, it is one of the most efficient nutrient conversion systems into proteins and carbohydrates that we'll have across the farm. And if we can get this right, then your nutrient conversion rate from plant into proteins and edibles and feed will allow the expansion of the farm very quickly, because you can add animals continuously which produce more manure, and these little guys can be the base of the ability to add further animals and nutrients of that cycle, I should say. A dugout canoe is suggested. It allows the addition of saltwater fish to be brought on, as well as buying from the fishing people. You have an ocean, you should take advantage of it. You also have a lake that you can then put the same boat on and paddle and get fish there with nothing more than a bit of fishing line and a little bit of bait. It also creates a little bit of a sensation of what's the word I'm trying to look for here? Entertainment. And so that you come away from the farm so that you can think about things. Obviously you can't have everybody gone, but at least one person a day can go do a little fishing, walk away from the farm and come back with fresh ideas. I find it's always good to come back, leave, come back. If you're constantly faced with the same thing again and again, you may not be able to create better ideas. And one of the biggest things about permaculture is to constantly have that flow of ideas. So food preservation, the dryer, it has 3 drying areas, morning, afternoon for everything, and then the evening. And it's a large dryer we've designed with 3 big tops, black pipes at the top to really suck the air through. One of the major components about drying, it's not the heat, it's actually the airflow going through there. And if you can produce good drying mechanisms, you can possibly even create a partnership with your local fishermen who are actually taking the fish back and drying it. And a lot of times by the time they get back to their village, the fish is already beginning to deteriorate. Here we can take it right off their fishing grounds, we can put it right into the dryer, clean it, and the stuff that we clean, the heads, the guts, if we take it out of the larger fishes, that's automatically back into the black fly larva, to be able to create, again, more nutrient input into the entire system. Composting, lot of information about composting out there. Understanding what types of composting you want to do will be necessary. Here we've explained how to put some plastic down that then drains into a trough, so that when you water it, even in the rain season, the rains water it, you can capture this water, it'll be very nutritious, and you can constantly put layer after layer after layer of grass, a black dirt for the inoculation, and then some sticks on streams just to keep the whole thing from blowing away. And you can just throw that over, and when you want to add more grass, you can just throw the sticks over, put more grass on and put it back high. You saw in the pictures that these are relatively high, a minimum of 6 foot we want them high, and it won't be that heavy. And you can use palm leaves along the top. You don't want to make this too far apart, only 2-3 foot apart, and then you can have these collecting it, and the palm leaves obviously again will deteriorate over time, and you can redo it once the whole thing's deteriorated. Try not to get the palm leaves to puncture the plastic, so you want to see when those palm leaves start to deteriorate so that you can take them off. Make sure you take the spines off the palm leaves with your cutlass so that it doesn't puncture the plastic. And even if it does puncture the plastic a little bit, it's not the end of the world. The majority of the water will still run down as you water it. It's important to understand the watering. It's important to get this. It's a science in itself, but it's also like growing plants. So you could actually put drip irrigation onto it so that you could constantly drip it once you get a good understanding of how much water you need through the dry season. Here's a small chart showing you exactly what is needed to be in the compost. One of the big things, oxygen. So this whole methodology will allow oxygen to come in through the bottom, which is usually where things start to get a problem happening. And once you get bad smells in your compost, that means things are going wrong. Once you get that very rich dirt smell, that means things are doing very, very well. You can also get into compost teas and things like that, and conversion of nutrients by sealed containers, but that's something we feel that would be better for phase 2 once we've established a continuous presence of both the owner and an understanding that the current security guards, the 5 people, are capable of processing the current system before we add any too much information and burden them with what they need to do. Non-degradable garbage mechanism. One of the things they do here is burn everything. Maybe we have to continue to burn things unless we can find a proper solution for massive amounts of plastic bottles. We can look into phase 2 some type of conversion into fuel, but that will be something that will require microcontrollers and stuff like that, and probably the presence of the owner. So at this stage we'll have to continue, but one of the biggest concepts that this design will bring is the fact that there's a minimal amount of inputs from the outside, and if we can actually stop the inputs of non-biodegradable products, we can at least stop the increase of these this type of garbage coming onto the land. Obviously the ocean will always keep bringing the garbage up the beach and then into our waterways, but we may be able to come up with solutions there in phase 2. We don't use the waterways till phase 2, again because we've realized those waterways will take a considerable amount of effort and consume finances, and in order to be able to use them and keep them clean by actually sheltering them from the garbage that comes out from the beach. Wet season reservoirs, we're not doing too much swale digging because effectively everything tends to just disappear into the sand, and we don't have any of that downhill swale to capture, which captures nutrients. It comes up from the bottom of the sand. So what we can do though is possibly put a reservoir just behind the nursery under the trees. We could dig a reservoir there and then dig a ditch from that blue line that was in the middle where we said there's about 2 meters of water that sits, and dig a ditch. Would have to be in the rain season so that we know we're digging deep enough without developing contours, without doing any too much surveying. We can dig a ditch all the way through and start to collect it just about here and see how well it fills up. If we can help it with some grass and possibly some mud, it would be good, but we're looking for something that's big enough to then pump water down into a ram pump, and then have the ram pump water back up into what would be a higher, say the duck pond. So now we can fill water into the duck pond without actually doing anything, or we can have different types of reservoirs with a small 7 by 5 meter pond liner with sand barriers to keep it above the ground, and then effectively you have automated watering that you just need to switch on and it can drip irrigate throughout the area that you need it. And having water a foot, 2 foot, a meter above the ground is perfect for reducing the watering requirements and automating watering. The pump, the ram pump, you can make with all materials that are locally available. And this, for every meter you come down, you can go 20, 25, almost 30 meters up, depending on what conversion, 1 inch to ½ inch, 1 inch to ¼ inch, depending on how much big of a pipe you go up and how big of a pipe you come down with. But generally, a 1 inch pipe coming down 1 meter can push water 30 meters, up to 30 meters above it. That's directly above. So easily a 2-3 meter rise here will be achievable, and quite easily. So this is something that we can look at to produce. It has to be, again, we've got a requirement that any open water needs to have fish in it. So if the water comes long enough for mosquitoes to lay eggs, germinate and hatch, and then it disappears back into the ground, it will not be useful. However, we can find a way to keep the water there for at least a few months of the dry season, the wet season. 4 to 5 months will be a great area for frogs, for insects, and of course we'll put the fish in here and they can swim up there as they do naturally anyway. So it can be, again, increasing the nutrients, increasing the abundance of life, and creating microclimates in and around the area. Again, the concern will be the mosquitoes that are produced. So the specialized swales. Here is what we're trying to explain by putting the plastic down here and then building the sand, which again we've said, this sand, normal sand, will probably just fall into this water and consume everything. But this sand tends to hold its ground very well, and once you build it up like this, it will stay in that position and it'll compact pretty well. And here you'll have the water in here, and you can put a piece of PVC pipe into the water to see what level it is, and then just pour water and keep this nice and full regularly by having wells dug pretty close to the swale or at the beginning of a line of swales. And then you can connect the swales with pipe through siphoning the pipe, a siphon pipe between swales, so you're only actually putting water into here and you'll get the same level. If you keep all the swales at the same level along contour, as we've done in the zone 1, you can actually do exactly that, which is to fill one and it'll automatically fill all the others. So again, you can look at this in many different forms. Here we've drawn it out for us. Here's the plastic. It's actually pretty far underground. We then dump the soil again over here, so you almost don't see the plastic. So it could be that this is completely covered and you don't actually see the water at all. Or you can dig this down and bring it down and put fish in here. Another thing you can do is put mosquito netting. You can get 3 foot by 100 foot of mosquito netting and keep it over this, and this will allow you to then put algae and duckweed, and grow duckweed and algae, keep it from the birds and everything, and grow it very well here. These groundnuts, if you put groundnuts, they tend to grow. We've got pictures of groundnuts and potatoes, sweet potatoes growing here. Here you can put cassava, and again the sweet potato and the groundnut along the ground, increasing the nitrogen. Here you can do yams on this second hill, and we'll show you a hill rather like that naturally occurred. We didn't build it, it was there, but it gave us the idea, and there happened to be a little bit of pond water, a kind of a pond that dries up in the dry season, but it's very wet during the rain season. And here we can put yam, make a yam fence for the initial cover, which will then degrade, and we can put pawpaws and we can put bamboo along here. Pawpaw trees can be up and fruiting within 7 to 8 months if you're given the right nutrients, and if you can be doing at the beginning of the rain season, they can get that 4 meters, they can go ahead and get the water themselves and then produce fruit all the time. If you cut the pawpaw tree in the right place, it'll split, and you can cut it again, it'll split again, and you can start to produce quite a bit of pawpaw in these areas. We're looking to make these about 100 feet long, so just like those beds, and we'll make them 100 feet long because the plastic is about 100 feet long, and that will effectively allow us to have these nice long pawpaw things. And we don't have to just grow pawpaw, we can do bananas and stuff like that, although we won't necessarily get the nice banana circles. We talk about the banana circles down here. Here's what we're talking about. You put the plastic underneath, it's kind of far down, and then you basically build your swales, 2 swales, a double swale, which actually turns into a circle. And here's your banana circle, and you just keep dumping your compost and everything that you want to degrade in here, and you constantly get this. Of course, these edges, again, can be grown. Banana, cassava, or rather cassava, groundnut, sour, which is a local food that they eat, green, all the foods that they eat. Again, you've created edges that can constantly nourish and then die down. Cowpea, pigeon pea, everything that you have, you can start to grow on these edges. And it's all about starting this culture, because then once you start it, one of the things we don't want to do is prescribe what to start growing immediately, because it could be we've got some very good weeds that can effectively convert this soil very efficiently and concentrate certain nutrients and convert certain nutrients into chemicals that will actually make the soil even more fertile. So if we put too much of what we think we should be there, we won't get a chance to see it. And as you see in the maps in phase 1, we haven't immediately covered everything. We haven't cut down any of those local fruit trees. We're actually going to allow them to grow and help them by putting compost under them. And we're going to see if we can get any of the local weeds to start growing, to see what benefit they may have for the actual fertilization of the soil. It could be that we discover after one weed has grown somewhere, another plant grows very well, and it's actually the nutrients from that weed that was concentrated by that weed that allows those nutrients to grow. Integration of the farming, very simple. Provide seed and a hand pump. There's about a $135 treble pump that we can bring on. It's called a money maker. If we bring it onto the farm, we can stop the farmers needing to be close to the river, and they can make their beds a little further. Even the artisan farmers that are not supposed to be on the land, we can encourage them to come back a bit, stop cutting the trees and allow the trees to flourish around the river, which again will create further edges and improve the nutrients on the river. We can even then teach them to do that same concept in the other adjacent lands, so that they can actually improve that land and not have to come and encroach on this land. We can provide scythes to cut grass to our farmers, and then actually show the other farmers how to possibly even make their own scythes and to cut the grass. It's a very efficient method of cutting grass. The cutlass, it almost weighs too much, and you can get very tired bending over using it. With a scythe, you're standing up fully, you're inching forward, and you can slice through that grass, and it actually piles up beautifully to one side, and then you can take a basic wooden rake and pile it up, and you've effectively got a compost pile with very little effort other than cutting the grass. We'll also teach them to grow bamboo and cut the grass closer to the villages, so that once the bamboo starts growing, we can show them how to cultivate it, use it for structures, shelters, shade, as well fodder, as well as burning, so they stop burning the nicer, the better trees that can be used for future enhancements of both the land, and as something that we can use in a smoker that we could build in different phases, rather like the dryer. But this way we're smoking fish, and we can produce a product that can be sold in the market. So artisan farming, we're going to encourage it. We're not going to try and get it off the land. We're just going to educate it and produce a permaculture methodology that expands and hopefully is even taken into the villages and the surrounding areas. The nursery, rather basic, not too big of a germination hut, water right behind it, so a well right there, a little bit of cover again, just like the covered grounds. Raise the nursery, use pots. You can do something as simple as plastic bags and with sand in it, and maybe that's something that we can use some of those damn plastic bottles for, the larger ones, cut them off and use them to actually feed the nursery, or use them as pots in the nursery initially. Most of those plastic bottles have been floating in the ocean for some time. We've got ocean water. Salt water is a very good disinfectant, especially if you put it in the sun. so we can disinfect the bottles before we use them in the nursery. So we have a possible solution for a problem. As far as plants go, the main consumption is the human plants for the humans. We've listed some plants here. These are already well known. We're not bringing non-farmers on, we're bringing security/farmer, and we're teaching them to farm the keyhole gardens. We're enhancing their skills, their local skills, and providing them a little bit more information and tools on how to develop this particular style or design of farming. And these are the types of plants that they will be using for their own foods. And once that becomes self-sustaining, we're away. We're light years ahead of where we were when this was initially attempted with the aquaponics, and we're very close to becoming self-sustainable. Once this stuff is planted in those keyhole gardens, and some of this can even be planted right there on the ground, things like cassava. We will also put in the pigeon pea, and here we start to talk about other plants that should be incorporated into those areas. Again, we're not designing pathways because what we want is to have that developed naturally. We don't have to cut into anything. We're not cutting out grasses. We don't have to put down pebbles for sands. All we have to do is walk. And when we walk on something regularly, it becomes a path. And the areas we don't walk on, they become natural areas that can start to, again, produce nutrients, and possibly we'll know then to put cowpea down, and we'll know then to put lotus beet down, we'll know then to possibly start growing different plants that will enhance the soil in that area. And if we start to pile soil up, we can then produce a few of these different fruit growing plants around that zone 1. I'm not saying that these shouldn't go out to the other zones. We're just saying right now we're concentrating on the zone 1, possibly a little bit of zone 2 up by where the farmers are, to create some shade during the summer or the dry season. Here are some further additional indigenous crops to Africa, and so we can start. This should also be something that is a voyage of discovery into understanding what else there is in the areas and what can be brought in. Again, we're talking about farmers' security, not pure security. We're not taking military people and turning them into farmers. We're taking farmers and turning them into security, and it's basically their presence that is the security. So a lot of these plants, once you get to understand it, they should be able to go and find them and bring them to the land. There's also a lot of local lore about certain plants. The white man banga or the almond tree is a very good one for discussion, probably because it creates a shade, and that shade, the coolness, allows people to cool down, and they become more capable of discussing rather than with the heat. I think they actually did a study where they took kindergarten children and raised the temperature by 2 degrees, and these kids could not get along. When they reduced the temperature a further 2 degrees, suddenly all the children were playing well with each other. So maybe the folklore about the white man banga tree is very, very appropriate. There's also, this is for companion planting, so we've got a chart here, and it's available online. Both of these documents have the original producers of the document, their websites and everything, so you can go back to their website and possibly thank them for this stuff. And the compost toilet, there's also a lot of websites, and we can provide some websites for further reading, so we have a very good understanding, and so that design is used properly. So the companion planting is probably something we use in the keyhole gardens and in the covered gardens. So that should be analysed when you decide what's going to go into it. But obviously it's most likely going to be the local foods, and they probably already know how to do companion planting. It may just not be against pests, it may more be against creating nutrients in the soil. So this companion plant being processed or chart will actually help to enhance also pest control. And finally, animal fodder. Well, animal fodder, we will try and produce this cowpea, pawpaw, all things like this. Worthwhile starting to plant that along the edges of the bush, watering it inside the actual the zone 1 as well, and getting that up to speed so that the goats are not going so far away, and they can start actually staying around the edges of the zone 1, which will ultimately increase the nutrition and increase the zone 1 and allow us to expand very quickly outwards. Outer zone tree planting as well as interior zone, we've given a couple of suggestions here on what to grow out. Obviously, as we go further out into the zone 3s and back in, these are the fruit trees and the stuff that we're going to go pick. As we go out further, we don't necessarily want stuff that we're going to pick regularly, and we want the good wood out there. Zone 5, as you saw, is almost like a protection from the village and the more passive, the traffic areas. So you might even want to do a few of the fruit trees out there so people don't encroach and come all the way in, but there's actually food on the edges around there once you've created the shade. So more on the tree planting. This is more if there's time, if we see success, then we should start with it in phase 1, maybe second year of phase 1, start looking at planting these types of plants. Not that we're not going to do some of the planting here of these plants. We can start germinating them, we can start growing them in the nursery. Some of them take quite a few years just to get a few foot so they can go into the nursery right away. We can start producing the stuff in the nursery and then taking it out to the outer zones. Estimated costs. This is something to look at. To produce, these are the projects, the specialized swales, we're estimating to be about $300 for all 6 swales. So $300 for all 6 swales. That includes the money you're paying for the workers during man hours. We're not bringing any external workers, we're literally just digging. We have suggested that you dig through the dry season, but it could be that if you're starting the whole project in the wet season, it might be worthwhile getting some of that piles up, getting some of that plastic in, and getting some of those swales, those specialized swales working, because then you can take advantage of the wet season to actually allow some of those bigger plants to start getting those roots 4 meters down. If you're not planting, you can take cuttings and from other plants, cover them with plastic, and we can explain that, and tape, and let the root start to grow while it's on the main plant, and then cut the bottom off, and there you have a rooted cutting ready to go in the ground and ready to expand and start following the water down. So that's a good aspect of the land, that you do have water just below the surface in most cases, and as it goes down, the plants will know to follow it. The keyhole gardens, we're estimating that all 6 keyhole gardens will only take about, or 7 rather, will only cost about $300. That's including the labour. The security hut, we've separately got somebody to come in and build the security hut, and they've talked about it. I should say that we've estimated with the cement and the labour $300. $300 is roughly 1,200,000 leones. And you pay somebody 200 to 400 leones a month depending on their skill. So a mason will come in for 400 leones, probably even 200 to build something as small as a security hut, and 400 to build the main house. So very good. A yam cover, this is mainly sticks, $50, and the rest is on the farm. The bush sticks will probably be harvested from the local village, again putting money into their economy rather than going into the central town to buy those bush sticks. The chicken hut, again, it's almost like the security hut, $300. The mason has already seen designs and suggested this is probably the best cost. Chicken and fly houses, again $300. I should say cricket. That's not chicken, that's cricket. Cricket and black fly, again $300. Based on the wood, the carpenter who would do the roof for everything has seen the designs and has suggested this is the cost. Goat enclosure, again, 300, mainly because of that concrete foundation. That could probably be reduced quite dramatically. The drying hut, about 500. It's a slightly bigger hut. It's going to need a little bit more skill in making sure the right materials are put in place and the right structures in place, especially with the glass windows that will effectively create the heat and the circulation source. Compost toilet, this will be the biggest cost outside of the small hut or the owner's house, but we're not including the owner's house into this. That will be a completely separate project. So but the compost toilet will cost quite a bit of money because it is an intricate design and because you are effectively creating a second story. But it will become a major aspect of keeping the hygiene in the area. So very well worth the time. Omalanky, you can build an Omalanky for, we've already priced it 150, and that's a good tyres and good back end wheel. The Omalanky is also much better than a wheelbarrow on the sandy soil because of its larger wheelbase and its larger wheel surface area. It works much better on the sandy soils. And we've already had people delivering stuff onto the soil when we were doing test systems, as well as trying to bring some clay onto the land, and it works very well. So it's been proven. Mobile chicken hut, 150. It's basically wood with some shelter. You might even be able to build it purely with local materials from the farm. And the mobile goat, again, 150. Basically wooden structures, possibly from the farm, wood sticks. But it would be better to build something that then can last for a few extra years, so you don't have to waste time to rebuild it. So putting a little bit slightly better materials in will enhance its longevity. Wells, 6 wells. The wells will probably cost about, I think, wells will cost roughly about 1,200. I think we have the price of wells here. So wells will probably cost about 1,200, but that's mainly because of the plastic pipe. That may be even an exaggerated cost because I've overpriced the plastic pipe in case there's a short supply because of the Ebola and things like that. So it could be that actually this isn't that high, it's actually dramatically reduced and I've just exaggerated it here. Water foot pump, they come in about 150 including shipping. So if we can get those, it'll be very good for the artisan farming. And the basic farm tools, probably about another $200. And a canoe, $150, already looked at that. So roughly about $6,200 to get most of the projects and most of that initial stuff, not including animals and the cost of animals at this stage. We're talking about 38 days of 955 man hours, between 5 people, about 38 days. So you're talking about 2 months, 3 months, based on things that may not work properly. You're talking about possibly 4 to 6 months to produce that first area, and then you have the opportunity to then decide whether or not to expand with the same expandable things, and we'll talk about that a little later, or to go plant trees in those areas. But most likely it's probably better to actually start the trees in the nursery and then plant them out in the second year or in the second phase. Initial animal costs, here's basically 650 should get you started with quite a few animals to get going, and then obviously these breed and produce more of their own. And first year's running cost probably about 6,600, and obviously some of that running cost is already included in the projects and the time, the labour in the projects. But the biggest cost here is the labour, and if you're only using 4 to 6 months of the labour for the project, you've still got 6 more months to expand and produce more of those special swales. The plastic only costs about $10, $12 to make a 100-foot swale, so that's not prohibitive. If you've got the labour, you need the labour on the land, the 5 labourers coming constantly, you could then produce, even if it's just making the piles that you would plant the trees into, you could start to use the labour. The point is not to exhaust the labour, however, that's why only 5 hours a day, and that 5 hours doesn't have to be 5 hours in a row. It could be 2 hours in the morning, go home for a few hours, come back and do a few more hours in the evening, so that there's not continuous effort trying to be expended during this day. You take a nap during the day. It's about not driving people, but showing them that actually permaculture is a very efficient and effective method of farming, so that it becomes part of their culture. Summary of costs, we're talking the first year with projects about $13,000, not particularly large considering the area you're going to affect and how you could expand further. If you expanded for another 40 days, and when we talk about expansion your wells, and here's the wells at 1,200, that was the well cost. Specialized swales, $295, so for another 1,800 you could expand every 40 days out with six wells, covered gardens, keyhole gardens and specialized swales, and just keep expanding, most likely along that bush line, so that you increase that edge and you expand that edge out. And you wouldn't necessarily just have to go along the bush line. With those swales, you could go straight out across the land and straight up to that high level stream or river, and start allowing farming to occur, not just in the wet season, but because you're creating that shade, you can do it all the way into the dry season. Probably not necessarily cost effective to create a covered garden all the way out there. That's why you probably need to just build the swales, put food on it, wait for those trees to come up, and then the next year or the third year you'd be ready to expand your farming, artisan farming in that area. And of course, because you've built the swales, you can just pump the water that's needed on through the dry season right there. And we'll talk about some automations of pumping methods further on. Things not included in this estimate: the aquaponics system is completely separate. It wasn't part of this initial design, and nor was the owner's house, but it was asked to be developed and looked at what would be something that could then be used by second phase, or even at the end of the first phase, as part of the design. So that's why we were allowed to design the house as a big block, so that when the owner comes they can use it, but then it can be converted back into the actual process in the system. A word on experimentation: be careful, too much experimentation could take resources and natural time away from the actual system. Ensure that your system is functioning well. Those elements described earlier, those inputs and outputs, are all combining very well. They're well understood, they're well established, and you could get it to where you're actually running the whole process for more than an hour, no more rather than an hour or two. And this will allow you then to go out and experiment, look at different plants, talk to the local culture, find out what is used as a medicinal plant, bring it back, stick it, develop more of the herbs, not just the ones we know, but also develop further types of plants that are local and may not be well known. The African plants document also produces a lot of ideas that could go out and be sought after and looked at and asked for. People travel in and out of different countries, all the way from Mali to Dakar. So all those areas, you may be able to get them to bring certain crops back. They may already exist in the local market, we don't actually know it. So a lot of experimentation there. Bring them back, germinate them, and see how they grow. Stick them out on the ground and see if they actually continue to flourish, and see what effects they have with the plants around them. So great on experimentation, just not so much that you forget the actual system. So ideas for automation: solar pumps. Now the solar pumps were stolen the last time, but that's probably because the actual presence on the land left to go get protein, to go get food. Once we have self-sustainability, that may not occur, so solar pumps could come back It will be a decision based on, based on how secure we feel. And airlift pumps are probably better mechanisms than solar pumps. And when we talk about solar pumps, a water pumping propeller, an airlift pump lifting water maybe a foot or two, requires at least 3 to 6 feet of depth to get it up there. We have seen some people suggesting that you can actually lift it without that depth by putting a special designed nozzle on the bottom end so that the water doesn't push back. But that's something probably for a later phase. But an airlift pump for automation, if we get to that stage of security, was probably a better pump because it can pump solids without a problem. So taking fish manure out of the fish pond to pump it into a filter that then drains back into the fish pond through the sand, and then you can take that sand and fertilize different beds, would be a very good method. And the airlift pump would be very good because it doesn't have to flow that high. It only has to go half a foot or a foot onto the sand. It can collect all the nutrients and then drop back into the water. And the airlift pump is basically a piece of pipe with a solar powered aerator. And you can get small ones for $12 to $15. You can get better ones for $50 to $60. But then you need a controller and you need a bigger solar array. I would suggest not trying to put batteries. If you bring batteries, you're bringing a very, very bad chemicals onto the land. And if you can pump your solar purely when there's sun, be the best way to do it. You can get a lot of your pumping. So you want to pump excess water during the day that then drips down at night. I would suggest in the initial phase we don't overpopulate the ponds. We don't try and produce too much fish culture in the ponds because that would require bigger pumps and more complicated methods. But just keeping enough fish in the pond to keep the mosquitoes down, and a few lights, solar lights that can shine for a few hours a day onto the water so that you can attract some of those bugs, which enhances the food production on those ponds, or the feed for the fish, to which you don't even have to feed them quite a bit. Pump sand to make swales. If you do decide to start making, I would say call them gutters rather than swales. You could take a regular small mining pump for a few $100s. You can buy a water pump, petrol-driven water pump. And in the rain season, you could use a Venturi fitting that allows you to pump. By pushing water into the Venturi fitting, it pushes water out but also sucks the water out from the surrounding and allows you to actually suck out solids. You could then build a sandbag kind of pond next to it, or a big line of sandbags to retain the sand coming out, and slowly build a swale without too much heavy intensive labor in the wet season. We already suggested digging in the dry and watching in the wet where the swale is, and then digging in the dry season. This would probably allow you to actually get some of those swales built, get some of that digging done in the wet season using one of these pumps rather than a massive large earth mover. You could probably actually dig a pretty good well or whole large reservoir using this method as well, especially if you've got quite a few roots and things in the area. You could do this, then suck the water out, or rather suck the water out through your pump. You don't have to worry now with this method about the pump propeller being destroyed by the sand, because you're not actually getting any water through the sand. You're pumping clean water, filtered water into the pump. The pump is then pushing the water out through the Venturi system or fitting. The Venturi fitting, as the water comes out, it sucks air and it sucks water and it sucks solids, and it pushes them out through the Venturi fitting into a pipe. And that is effectively what is moving the actual solids, not your original pump. It's a very good way actually to pump any kind of water that you're going to have solids in, especially if you want to retain the solids in the water. Here is a solar fluidine water pump designed by yours truly, and this can be automated. We get into microcontroller discussions later on. This can be automated, probably not for the phase 1, could be something for the phase 2. But the important part here is to start talking about solar cooker material so that you can start showing that actually this could be used manually, and nothing but a telephone alarm clock can go off. Because we're in the tropics, the sun is going to come directly overhead. You're not like in the northern or southern hemispheres where you have to tilt it up and down, just straight across. So all you're doing is just moving that. You can build that out of wood, put some aluminum sheeting or aluminum foil, glue it to a piece of wood, and effectively it would concentrate the sun onto a pipe or to a series of pipes, and you could effectively create solar cooking. Here, this one is actually creating a fluidine water pump, which heats the air in the top of the fluidine engine, which creates that resonance in the liquid sterling, which is what a fluidine is, and then it pumps water from the ground up into this well. This then lets the water drop down, and then that water is heated, boiled, and then it drops down in here, and here you have boiled water. Biggest problem when children get diarrhea, they continue to get diarrhea, especially in these little villages. If a child is 6 years old, it's a miracle, the fact that they didn't die from the previously. If a child is 4 years old, it's a testament to their strength, because if they start drinking water, their mothers don't necessarily realize it's the water, and they can continue to just keep feeding them the same water, because the child's going to want more water. Constant dehydration. This process could be a solution. We are looking into bringing it into phase 1. The cost, it's not a what's it called, proven system, so it could be other methods are used, but it's something that would certainly create that very strong cooperation between the villages, the mammies, and the farm. And it's something that should be looked at for phase 2, even if it's not this particular system. There are systems out there we've discovered for 2,000, 1,000 called village filtering system. It uses solar power, it uses a lot of mechanics, electronics, and batteries, which we're trying to stay away from. But if this kind of system can't be invested in, then something like that would probably certainly be better to be invested in for the future, and to get that cooperation from the surrounding farms. Wind turbines, there is certainly 3 to 4 kilometers of wind that goes through the system. You have the harmattan, you have the tropical, you have the ocean in the morning and in the evening. So a wind generator could be certainly something that would produce enough energy to pump water. We could have windmills directly onto pumps, not necessarily electric turbines, but this is definitely something to look at for phase 2s and 3s. Microcontrollers for watering. Again, microcontrollers have got so cheap now, you can even make them wireless. It used to be you needed at least £50 to make it wireless, now it's £5, £4 with this thing called the ESP8266. And these things can control all types, even this whole mechanism is designed to be controlled by these microcontrollers. The microcontrollers cost £5. You can design them on a £50 system, and then basically convert the whole program and everything into a £5, program it, connect all the sensors that you need, connect the motors that you need, and the whole thing runs for less than $25 to $30. So you stick them in a box and away you go, and put a little solar collector and a small battery, and you've got something that can run itself. And now, as you automate the farm, it means you can expand, you can feed more into your experimentation, you can feed more into your other aspects. Again though, this is when all those cycled elements that we talked about, the inputs and the outputs, when they're in place first. You've got to make sure that's moving in the right direction, everything's going well. Here's the list of the folders and what we're sending. The components, these are the diagrams and the pictures. Within the components you also have a SketchUp. If you want to take a look at them closer, you can download SketchUp, and then you can take a look at all the diagrams we showed, the whole 3-dimensional. You can pick them apart, you can redesign them, you can delete them if you think they're rubbish, and you can redesign the whole thing if it's not applicable. But we think most of this stuff is applicable. We've created them with this particular land in mind. Here's again some of the pictures of the elements. Here we use iMind map. Again, free downloadable program, so that if you bring in additional elements into it, different plants and everything, you can add those, and it could be that they're affecting different aspects of the design, and then you can document it and show, and so you capture that information for other permaculture people in when you do your training and things like that. So it's definitely something worthwhile to have. Google Earth, everything is in a KMZ file, and everything can be looked at for Google Earth if you want to expand it. Again, if you wanted to add to it as you create the design. This is a 4-phase design, so we will be creating stuff into this design, adding stuff in, and again, we can expand those files, and we'll send these files in so that you can quickly add them and see where we're going and add the inputs. And of course for the classes as well. Cost files as an Excel spreadsheet, again you can add, you can adjust if you find things like that plastic pipe, it may not be the right cost. We exaggerated because of the Ebola, it could have increased the cost of certain goods. So it could be that you can change those, and you can actually affect both expansion and the original projects for a little bit less. Okay, well I think that's it. We're going to show you some pictures of the land right now so that you can get a good grasp, or it could be that we've shown them already. Well, thank you very much for listening. We hope that this has been a educational, entertaining, and a permaculture experience.